Um, okay, so now we will continue. We have an interesting case where Roberto Priolo will be talking about tackling academic overburden with simple lean tools. So, Roberto,
Hi, Chris. Good morning.
good morning, Priolo. Here
How
is
are you?
still night. We're still not yet in the morning here in Brazil, but it's
Right,
okay.
right.
And I will leave you there on stage so you
Thank you very
can
much.
continue.
All right. Good morning, Steve. How are you?
Good morning. I
Good.
am stoked. I'm so excited to go
Welcome,
after
welcome,
such a cool
welcome,
speaker.
and welcome everyone. So Steve and I met, I think, around 11 years ago when I was living in London. I was the editor of a lean magazine, and Steve collaborated, and I collaborated for articles, and we also met at a couple of lean conferences. This is kind of serendipitous that we are after so long we're meeting again. Now, Steve is going to be talking to you all about higher education, lean in higher education. So I asked him to participate in the conference because this is often a kind of like you don't hear very often about lean in higher education, and he's doing a fantastic job with the Lean in Higher Education network, which he founded and chairs, which is a network of, I believe, over 3,000 people all around the world. And they share cases. They have an annual event to try and improve higher education, which is, of course, sort of a, I guess, perceived as a bit of a traditional environment. So Steve has an interesting example for us of how one of the biggest problems in higher education can be tackled using lean, and that's overburden. So without further ado, I will leave the stage to Steve, and I will see you in a bit. Thank you, Steve.
Hello. It's wonderful to be here. I loved, I think it was Vasili's speech talking about how lean affected him personally and his family. And I'm going to come back to that when I go through my little chat just now. Higher education is a curious industry. Um, Many of you, I guess, will have been to university or will work with the universities, maybe to recruit people from, or maybe collaborating on big projects with research, perhaps. I imagine when you reflect on that, you'll probably think that universities really need some lean in their lives. And this is something which I think I agree with. And as Roberto said, there is a growing community of people around the world who think that higher education is important, but also see some of the barriers, all those things that get in the way to delivering the value that universities can do. What I want to talk to you about today, though, is about my own story, my story as a lean practitioner in my university. My university is Edinburgh Napier University. It's based up here in Edinburgh, in Scotland. And it's doing quite well. Last night was the Times Higher Education Awards here in the UK, and we were shortlisted for University of the Year. We didn't win, but I think being shortlisted, the only university in Scotland to be shortlisted for that was okay. We're the #1 modern university in Scotland, a top 10 UK modern university, the #1 university in Edinburgh for student satisfaction, of which we are particularly proud, and the top Scottish modern university for research, power, and impact. So that means that for universities of our class, the research that we deliver is absolutely making the biggest difference compared to our peers, which is very pleasing. And making a difference is really what our university is about. It's the sort of place where you might see academics with kind of mud on their shoes because they've been out in the field, or with ink on their sleeves because they've been dealing with a printing press, or wearing a nursing uniform because they've been out there in a hospital helping people heal. And I love it. But we do have our problems. So I'm going to tell you 3 stories about how we've used lean tools to approach problems working in higher education. But higher education itself as a sector faces problems, not just my university. And in Lean, we talk about the three wastes, don't we? We talk about muda, that kind of non-value adding waste. We also talk about mura, that the importance of flow, removing unevenness. And we talk about muri, we talk about overburden. Well, overburden is something that I think many of us see. I'm again reflecting on tact time from our previous speaker, but it's something that we face as a challenge, I guess, in many industries. In higher education, especially for our academic colleagues, it really is felt quite hard. Partly academics, it's their name on the book, so they're quite personally tied to their work, and they put in a lot of hours to get things done. There was a survey done by Times Higher, which is one of the industry-leading journals, and it was on work-life balance and retention in higher education. It was done recently. 1,200 academics, primarily in Europe, the US, Australasia, and Asia, where, interestingly, people said that things had changed since the pandemic, that 80% agreed that flexible work, including working from home, had improved their work-life balance. We're talking about rough seas. Interesting that change has been a benefit. However, 40% reported having longer working hours than they had 3 years ago, driven in part by those blurred boundaries between home and work life, with the time saved on commuting being spent doing more work instead. Maybe that's true for your industry too. 29% reported having to take time off due to poor mental health caused by their workload. 32% reported more administrative work, driving increased workload. And 44% said they expected to leave higher education within 5 years, with academics more likely than professional services to express this view. I don't know if you went to university. If you did, that's beautiful. If you didn't, that's also beautiful. But this screen, the image here might be familiar. This was our Freshers Week a few years ago. And you get a huge crowd of people coming together. It's chaotic, there's stands, there's a lot of stuff happening at the same time. And it's also a highly emotionally charged time. It's the first time many people have been away from home. Not all of them, of course, but the first time that many people are entering into a space with all the expectations of what university might have for them. And so it's busy. There's lots going on, and it feels intense, and it feels important because the work the universities do helping people in hospitals is important. And it makes for a heady mix where staff commit more and where overwork seems part of almost how the system is. And then when we look into the metrics that our governments, certainly in the UK, put into higher education, again, this sort of drives people to work harder and harder and harder, as opposed to necessarily doing maybe what the right thing is. So how does this play out in my university? Well, in the higher education network, we have people who focus on various parts of university stuff. Many people who practice lean in higher education focus on what you might think the back office operations, finance, invoices, um, student accommodation, those kind of things. And those things are important. There is an academic, a marvelous academic, a chap called Vincent Viegel. He wrote the book Lean in the Classroom, this book here. And he really has challenged the Lean in higher education community, along with others, to look at how Lean can deal with the academic process and actually making things better in terms of the primary business of learning and teaching, and perhaps research. In researching his book, Lean in the Classroom, he did a tour around the UK, and he came to visit us here at Edinburgh Napier University. And he shared a story about exam marking. And this is traditionally a challenging problem. You might ask, why is it a challenging problem? We'll come to that. Where a student sits an exam, often in the before times, in a room in front of desks. Now, more often, those exams are done completely online. Something that we never thought we would be able to do 4 years ago. And then those papers are sent to academics to mark. And typically speaking, it will take a number of weeks or perhaps a week to turn around that marking time. And it's often high pressure, right? It's a huge batch job. You've got a couple of hundred students, a large batch of work, and it's got to be turned around. I wish we could go to single piece flow on this. Oh, I love it. But as it is, I can't change that. So we have, well, I'll come back to that. We have this kind of batch flow. And so Vincent said, well, what do we do? Well, rather than waiting a week to get exams, why don't we just schedule the marking? So Vincent, being a brilliant man, booked a room, got some pizzas, got the diaries of all the academics together and brought them in the room to do the marking in the same space. And guess what? Within 24 hours of the exam being completed, the students' marks was on the system. Brilliant. And of course, as you would expect, that decrease in, I guess, lead time was also linked to an increase in quality. Because as the people were marking in the room together, they were able to say, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? And rather than that conversation to check what the right mark was or check an unusual thing that a student had done, taking days and only involving 2 people, it was done in minutes or seconds and involved the entire team. So not only were marks quicker, but they were also better. This is the magic of lean, isn't it? And as part of the lean HE global kind of family, I guess, Vincent visited our university and shared this story. And I was challenged, could we do something similar in my university about how we do examinations, about how we do marking? And we looked around and we turned to our biological and biomedical sciences colleagues. And we said to them, could we help you with marking? We know you guys are good guys. You've got a lot to do. Could you help us with how you do your marking process? I guess we were looking to take them through a plan, do, check, act cycle to make sure that they could think and reflect on what they did. And after a little bit of persuasion, they said, okay, we'll spend an afternoon with you. How did we know this was a problem? Well, we knew it was a problem for us because academics were complaining about that overburden, about that too much work. Every year, the committee, people would say, oh, why do we have to work so much? We don't like the way this is happening. It isn't fair. It's not right that we do. And I need to tell you why, because this isn't marking short scripts. The biggest problem that they faced was marking their project papers. Each project paper is something like 10,000 words long. We produce something like 300 of these papers a year. And we have a small team of around 20 or 25 academics that have to mark this. We're looking like a load leveling problem, aren't we? You know, I love how lean tools can be applied in all contexts. Excuse me. So we got them in a room, and to go through that plan, do, check, act cycle, we said, well, let's identify some heuristics, some simple rules that we could do. Let's identify that kind of plan and see how they might apply to that. And these were some of the heuristics that we produced, some of the rules there on post-it notes on a wall. This was before the pandemic, back when you could do these things. Back before I'd discovered a lot of the online tools. And so we produced these in and got Eva and Claire, there they are. So sorry, not COVID, I promise. Got Claire and Eva together to actually test this. And we built a model, and this is a model on the wall in the room. Each dot corresponds to one of those 10,000 word papers that needs to be marked. Each pink post-it note, an academic staff member, each column, an area where they work. And so whilst Eva's moving the dots around, we're thinking about where they should work. Claire's checking on the computer, checking their workload, how do they work, looking at the data to try and build a model for how this would work. We moved the plan. So we're looking at the do, and we're starting to think about checking, is this something that will be worthwhile? And then, of course, they put it into practice. And did it work? Well, there were fewer complaints at the committee the next year. Not a great indicator for success. I think my Six Sigma friends would be like, come on, Steve, get some better data here. But for the team, it was important. They'd made a bit of a difference, and I built a relationship with Eva and started to understand how the biological and biomedical sciences worked. And it did make it better. It was fairer. People were clearer about what they were marking, and students did get slightly quicker responses. By the way, I did book a room for them to do the co-marking in, like Vincent's team did. I provided the sweets and the chocolate. Nobody turned up. Turns out when you're marking a 10,000 word paper, you really don't want to be sitting in a room on a hard chair. You want to be at home. And I think that's okay. So this is what biological and biomedical sciences looked like before the pandemic. Here we are together in a room around equipment, dealing with lab stuff. But the pandemic changed everything. Do you remember that photograph I showed you of Freshers Week of my university? Well, this was what Freshers Week looked like over the pandemic. We have stickers on the floor telling people where to go, screens, desks that aren't there. And this is actually the university being able to be open much more than many other places would be. There were the people, I should say, that are carefully distanced for the photograph to be taken. And it changed everything over the pandemic. But that sense of overburden was also continuing, in some ways getting worse. With academics moving from home, the intensity of providing was really huge. And the industry, higher education, pivoted very rapidly. Many lean thinkers have challenged me as to why universities don't do more digitally, why they don't, for example, deliver online exams, why we are wedded to a kind of massive batch and flow production when it comes to students coming to our universities. The experience of the last few years kind of showed that universities can be quite flexible, can change quite quickly, and did a lot in how we manage our students. It's quite cool, but also quite hard and quite challenging as we now think about moving back together into a more kind of traditional way of working again. Okay, let's go back to my friend Eva. You met her on a previous slide. Now, Eva, I don't think she would mind me saying, but she had to take a step back from being an academic, partly due to overwork, partly due to that burden. But just as the pandemic was starting, she returned to work. And she reached out to me. She had said to me, hey, Steve, you know that work we did during the exams work? Could you come and help me again? Could you come and help me? Because I feel like things are a little bit like this. And this is the image that she shared with me. She said, I feel like I'm kind of pulling this truck through the mud. There's so much going on. I don't understand what's happening. I'm not kind of sure how to find a way through it. So I was like, okay. And I was thinking of those lean conferences that I've been to, ones that maybe Roberta organized, when we talked about the role of the lean coach. We talked about the teacher. We talk about how we ask open questions. We challenge people and we get them to think things through. And so I said, sure, let's have a conversation. Let's work together, Eva, and see if we can find ways to deal with that kind of that sense of overburden that you face with being kind of stuck in the mud. And working online, well, I moved from those old post-it notes to a different type of post-it note. Post-it notes in, I think this was Microsoft Whiteboard. I'm using a different platform now. Again, something else we learned, we can swap platforms so often. And we started thinking about, well, how would we understand the work that we would do to manage the biology suite? Because Eva had now been promoted, I'd like to say partly because of her work managing the exams process, to lead the biology suite. And so what we did is we broke down all the jobs. We said, well, let's just break it down into its tasks. Let's build a process of all the tasks that happen over the year and put it out in this virtual space so we can start to understand what's going on. And for Eva, she said this helped her start to see the light a little bit. This was a photograph taken by Eva as she was on one of her morning walks. Here in the UK, you know, walking became, I have some friends from Brazil. They can't believe how much time we spend going for walks here in the UK. This was taken from one of Eva's walks, and getting that information out there started for her to feel like the sun was rising. And we involved Eva's team in this. So those people that were on that committee, well, actually, we let them know we were starting to do this, to start to think, how do we create a process? We called it a roadmap for running the program suite, to understand all the work that we put together to make this thing happen. So it started to feel like things were getting a little bit more positive. And it started to me to feel like there's a lean tool that I can use here. So I started to put in place a simple RACI matrix, and it looks a little bit like this. You won't be able to see the detail, but you'll get the picture. Those kind of process tasks clustered meaningfully in the columns down the left-hand side, with understanding precisely who does what in the matrix up there. Simple tool. We also linked it to when things happen over the course of the year. And then Eva started to be able to use this and start to have those conversations. And this is a photograph that she uses to describe the experience that this enabled. Again, this was also taken by Eva on one of her morning walks, looking the other direction. This is the Forth Rail Bridge here in Edinburgh, where I'm based. And our academic year consists of 3 trimesters, so it feels nice to have the 3 parts of the bridge. We sort of repeat our processes kind of 3 times a year. And she was able to use the tool to help her supporting her team. Now, this is going back to the point from Veselin's previous speech. Remember, Veselin talked about how actually lean affected him as a person, how we do things as individuals. Well, the interesting thing, what Eva would say is it isn't so much the tool itself, the matrix, that helps her to do the work. It's the process that she went through to create the tool, which means she now really understands what's going on. And yes, the tool is a useful thing, but having made the tool is what enables her really to be able to understand the process. And it releases that sense of, I guess, psychological overburden, that pressure that you feel because I don't know what's going to be happening here or what's going to be happening next. And I think that's the combination of those 2 things, not just the RACI matrix, but also the lean coach, the advisor, walking alongside, going to the Gemba and sharing with that person ways that they might think differently about it. That psychological relationship. And what's better, Eva's programs have done particularly well. So over the pandemic, when those lab sciences, remember those labs I showed you before? They had to be closed. There was nobody in those labs. I couldn't even find a photograph of those labs with the barriers up. There, actually, her programs maintained their student experience score, which is remarkable for classes which are primarily lab-based. Last year, in the National Student Survey in the United Kingdom, the programs that Eva are responsible for, biological sciences and biomedical sciences, both scored the best student experience in the country. And Eva, very kindly, thinks that that's partly down to the work that we did, helping her on the program roadmap. It's been shared quite far. It's a book chapter in this, supporting course and program leaders in higher education, practical wisdom for leaders, educational developers and program leaders. Academics love a long book title. But I think it's partly about academics don't necessarily know these tools. And it's easy for us to think, well, of course they should know these things. This is a simple thing. A RACI matrix, it's not hard. If you don't know it, you don't know it. And as lean thinkers, when we take these tools and these techniques into a workplace, there's the opportunity for them to be really transformational and help move things on. For me, my journey here continued. I don't have much time to tell you this story, so I shall show you the pictures and give you a few brief words. This is Gary. The reason this looks like a stock shot is that Gary is the Dean of Applied Sciences. He's Eva's boss's boss. And he noticed that actually there was something different happening in this area. And Gary said to me, "Hey, Steve, you know how you were helping Eva? Could you come and help me?" And I thought, well, when the dean says, you've got to say yes, don't you? So I turned up and I started talking to Gary about the problems that he faced. And do you know what Gary said? He said, "I'm overburdened. I've got too much work. There's too much happening for me to be able to manage." So I said, well, let's get together and see if we can create a picture of this. So we sat down online and we started sketching out, literally sketching in PowerPoint, what his organization looked like. And it started to look like this. And we realized there was a number of things that were happening that were driving some of the sense that he had overwork. Some of it was a view around what it meant to be an academic leader and a promoted and be a line manager, which meant that actually we ended up with almost as many line managers as there were staff members, which means that to solve a problem, rather than just 2 or 3 line managers talking, we had to get like 6 or 8 or 10. So complicated. And then when you are a professor, so the most senior academic, you were kind of managed by someone who was also of a professorial grade, which is cool, but in the school there weren't enough professors to manage a professor with someone from the same academic discipline. Let me explain this more practically. So you might be a professor in psychology, but because you're the only professor in psychology, you have to be managed by the professor in teacher education or in environmental biology. And that's okay when it comes to the job of academic leadership, but it takes you out of that workload discussion and those problems about how we work together there. So how do we get around this? I worked more with Gary and helped create a picture. This picture describes the kind of the real world relationships. We started writing down what we thought the job titles were. We thought we'd make a simple matrix, but over time, the organizational structures had accreted and become more complicated. If you think about leadership as a process, and if you think about how we see waste developing over time as people put in place those fixes, which are well-intentioned but perhaps clumsy, well, leadership had grown and become more complicated. We did what we did with Eva and her team. We brought them along with us, and I would encourage you, the respect for people, I think is important here, especially when dealing with people like academics. So we went out and we spoke to them. And we used an online discussion tool to say, how would you like, what principles would you use? Developing those same heuristics. Remember in the first example, I said, let's have some simple rules that we can apply, some tests that we can put in place to develop those. And we challenged what it meant to be in leadership, whether the head of subject role should be. We removed the need from a professor to manage another professor. We still made sure that professors had support from the most senior staff members to do the work they needed to do, but we moved them more closely into their academic areas. And we've challenged the role of having so many line managers, giving people more time to focus on their research, on their teaching, and be specialist line managers who would have more people to look after, but having that role so it cycles round so that people don't feel that they have to do that too much. Now, this is an experiment. Are we going to get it right? I'm not sure. We've started rolling out these changes to the organizational structure over the summer. The changes have been in flight since August, since September. And so about now, I'm having conversations with Gary, the dean, with his leaders and saying, well, is this working? Are the people loving it? Are they working in place to get things together? Now, and I'm quietly hopeful. I know that we'll have moved the problems on. Will we have solved everything? Will we have solved those heavy weights that we talk about? This was the best thing I could think about for weights in my university image bank. Those burdens of higher education, and I think probably not. I think there are structural problems in the sector that we need to challenge. I said I'd come back to Vincent Wiegel's book. He's setting up a brand new type of education outside of a standard university, based entirely in the workplace, where the student themselves designs their curriculum, where academics tailor everything around the need of that student to deliver a genuinely personalized output for that student. It's very exciting. It's challenging the sector. It's hard for it to be recognized by industry accredited bodies because it's difficult to demonstrate that the students have gone through that standard process. And here in higher education, we see one of the challenges, which is the gap between standardization and what universities offer and kind of an individual learning experience. But I think there is a way forward. I think universities will start to improve. And I think when I reflect on my learning, I reflect on that plan, do, check, act cycle. I reflect on using lean tools, and I reflect on how things grow. And I think in every industry, we can see the steps that we take, the project leading to the next one, having a bigger impact. And I think as we do that with lean, not just in higher education, but around the world, we all make a positive difference together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. This was so great to listen to. Thank you for sharing your experience. It's great to hear that Lean has changed lives and helped people deal with their work in a setting that can be as challenging as higher education. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's been great to have you here.
It's been
And,
good to be on the ship, matey. Ahoy there!
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Steve. We'll see you soon.
See you
Take
soon.
care.
Great case, Priolo. Great case.